Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You get more information and listen to previous shows or watch previous shows at our website, which is in the back, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Rodney Whittenberg with Melody Vision. And Rodney, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. Okay, and
Hey, everybody.
that is Rodney. And Rodney's an Emmy-winning composer, record producer, songwriter, filmmaker, educator, and multi-instrumentalist. And Rodney, the question I always ask, and I think I may have asked you a couple of years ago when we had you as a guest, but remind me, where'd you grow up as a child?
I was born in West Philly, born and raised,
Okay.
and back in the early 60s.
Okay. And so you actually stayed in West Philly or you stayed in the
No,
area?
we moved from West Philly at some point out to the surrounding suburbs of Philadelphia, and I am now and then moved around a little, throughout my life, moved around a little bit, but I'm now in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, in a 200-year-old farmhouse, which was built by Quakers in 1819.
Okay, but you still stayed in Pennsylvania area though, or in
Yeah,
Eastern Pennsylvania, you still stayed
yeah.
in the area. And the question, Rodney, in terms of when I'm reading about your background, you've done like a lot of different things. As a kid growing up, did you know you wanted to be this guy involved in about 73 different projects?
uh in some ways, yeah. I mean, some of my friends who've known me my whole life will joke with me because when they stop by to see me now, it's kind of very similar to what it was like when I was living in my parents' house, and in my parents' basement. I had a little, for all intents and purposes, I had a little studio slash workshop. And whenever a friend would stop by, I go, "Hey, what's up? Hey, let me show you this thing I'm working on." And it would always be some kind of thing I was trying to invent at my little electronics workstation, or it was some music that I had written, or it was what, it was way before there was a thing called podcast. It was kind of a podcast because I would talk about something and have sound design around it with music and things on it. I'd talk about UFOs or things like that. I remember in ninth grade, I convinced my English teacher to let me do all my book reports as little audio projects. So,
Very cool. Now the question is, do you have any of those projects around?
somewhere I have some recordings of some of that stuff from when I was a kid. It's really funny when I go back and listen to it because I really don't know what I'm talking about, but
No,
it's amazing to hear all the little sound effects and sound design things I did. I had built a little synthesizer from scratch when I was 12, and I would use that to make all sorts of weird noises and things. So yeah, I kind of had a sense. I mean, I owe all of this to my dad. Really, my dad grew up really, really, really poor in South Philly. Um, but by the time I came along, he was the first African American salesperson at Sears selling refrigerators and air conditioners. And that may not seem like very impressive now, but in the
sure.
late 50s, early 60s, you could make a lot of money selling air conditioners and refrigerators because they were new. And what he did with that money was he would buy rundown houses and rehab them. And so at 5, I'm helping my dad and helping. I'm with my dad
Right.
and showing me how to put in 220 line and outlets and drop ceilings, and it just opened my brain up to being creative and that I could make things. And I always say, I remember that first house that we did. At the end of it, when he then rented it to someone, I something clicked in my brain and said, "Wow, if I imagine something and then work really hard to make it happen, it can become real." Because I saw a house go from a shell to a place where people were moving into it in about a year and a half, and I was part of doing that with my dad. And then he also was just really into exposing the whole family to the world. I mean, I was on a plane when I was 5. We went to Niagara Falls when I was 5 years old. And I remember being 5, being petrified to get on the plane. I was crying. Because back then you walked out onto the tarmac and the
Right.
plane looked so huge. But, you know, I, after doing it once, it was not that big a deal. And I just, got into seeing things and being able to imagine things that I could then make real.
To your dad's credit, how did he pick up all these skills?
I think just sheer will. If he wanted to do something, he would just figure out how to do it, you know?
Because this was before YouTube too, right? You
Yeah,
couldn't,
yeah.
yeah, you
Oh,
could.
yeah, and some there are things that did not work out so well, but most of I remember particularly at the house that we lived in Yeadon where I grew up, the second half of my child after we moved out of West Philly. I remember that one thing he never really could do was miter a corner, like where you put the two pieces
Right.
of wood together. So, but whenever there was a corner, we'd have tons of putty and caulk in it because it was never line up right. But it wouldn't stop him. He'd keep going. And I mean, I helped my dad put siding on the house. We put shingles on the roof, like all that stuff. And he just would figure it out. But eventually, I remember once I got old enough, I would start going to the library and getting books to learn how to do the thing. And then he would get annoyed with me because I go, I think that's backwards.
Well, same
Shut up,
question.
boy.
The same question with you, Rodney, too, in terms of, so you went from the construction stuff you did to all of a sudden this technical stuff you started doing. How did you pick up those skills?
Well, I mean, my dad, that was my dad's love, was the construction stuff. But I always would go, there must be a way to do this. Sit down at a desk instead of climbing all over things. And so at a very early age, I fell in love with electronics. I was just like fascinated with how circuits work. And there was a thing that Radio Shack had called 101
Yeah,
electronics kit.
radio. There was a thing called Radio Shack, remember?
Yeah, there was a thing called Radio Shack, and Radio Shack had a 101 electronics kit. And I remember having that as a little kid, and it was this little box where you could connect the wires and you could make a little radio, you could make a little tone generator, you could make all these things. And I was obsessed. I would just spin out, and I had a huge Lego set and a huge erector set. So, and I was always trying to figure a way to combine these three things together and making something. And it's, I'm talking like, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was, just fascinated with this stuff. But again, I owe it to my dad who was just constantly exposing me to things, and my sisters, just exposing us to things that you know, we could explore. And music was my first love. I mean, oh boy. My mom told me that, at probably 4 or 5 years old, I would just sit in the living room and or in the kitchen and bang on pots and pans and just make up stuff. I was like, "Ba da da, ba da da da." I would just sing about whatever was going on. So there was always that, and that love of music was always there. And as a family, we went to the movies all the time. I mean, a couple of times a month, we would go to the movies. So I fell in love with all those things that are the things that I do now. I fell in love with when I was very, very young. And I didn't think of it as a career. It was just things I loved to do.
Well, isn't that cool though, Rodney, to be able to then come up with a career of things you love to do? Isn't
Yeah.
that a great way to live? Back to
Yeah.
you. So do you
Mhm.
remember, I'll ask you two questions. Do you remember your first computer?
Uh, my first computer that we had in the house was a Commodore little thing, and it just played Pong. And it was, and I have to be completely honest, I wasn't that into computers in the beginning. I don't know why, but electronics were more interesting to me than moving into computers, which seemed a little foreign when I was, 16, 17, 18. I was still into little circuits uh and transistors and those kind of things, because I don't think I made the connection, or the connection hadn't really been made between computers and making art. Computers were a thing over here for programmers, but electronics were a big part of, I mean, there's electronic music, which I also fell in love with when I was, I don't know, like 12 or 13. I mean, there was, Tangerine Dream and Guitaro, and I could go like this whole list, like early Stevie Wonder records, when he became a solo artist. They're all have tons of electronic sounds on them, and so that's where my interest, everything always went back to music. Whatever I was interested in, it all always somehow filtered back to my love of music.
What was your first instrument?
My first instrument was the piano. I wanted to play piano so bad, and I remember taking lessons, but we didn't have one. What my dad decided to get me was this little. I think I started this little teeny organ from Sears that had the fan on the bottom, and you turn it on, it would go, zzzz, and then you'd hit the key, and it would be very, very slow and responding. You'd be like, like kind of like an accordion almost, of what it sounded like. And then I went from that to, I think, my dad was the king of finding things that were either damaged or, like because he worked at Sears, he could find, he'd know all these things that were returned or broken, returned, or he'd go to the damaged and dent store that Sears had. He'd know what was there. So I think this home organ got returned at some point or something, and he was able to get it really cheap. So at one point he brought home like one of those 2-level home organs with the little drum machine on the side. I mean, people out there aren't going to know what in the world I'm talking about, because this is all from the 70s. I mean, but yeah, I think so. When I was around 9 or 10 or something, he brought home this little organ, and by the time I was 12, I had ripped it apart and rebuilt it and turned it into a synthesizer. So it made all these weird noises and things, and had different color sounds than what it originally came with.
Now, as a kid growing up, were you also into bands, or did start
Yeah,
playing?
I was in my first band when I was 12, and that's the band I played, that synthesizer I built, and it was with a bunch of friends. We were a little garage rock band. We played Color My World by
Sure. Do
the Chicago. We played Ballroom Blitz. I played
you
oh
remember
boy.
do you remember your first gig? First gig you ever got?
Well,
You got
first
that you
gig, you
got
mean a
paid?
paid gig, or the
Yeah,
first place I ever played
paid
somewhere in front of an audience?
paid gig.
God, I don't remember my first paid. Let me think. Wow. You want to know something? The first thing, did we get paid? Yeah, I think it was probably at a skating rink or something.
Right,
The
right.
band played. I mean, I remember we would, that first garage band, we'd open up the garage and play for the kids. Once we learned, we could barely get through a couple songs. But I think we played like the first band that I remember was a band I had, probably 3 or 4 bands after that one, where we played a skating rink. But the first time I got paid, really paid for my creativity, it's one of my favorite stories. I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I graduated from high school, but I'd already worked at SEPTA for about 6 months, and decided that I did not want to work a regular job. I did not want to be but I was in this store that I used to go into in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. It was a kind of a record store, head shop, kind of a place. It's where I had gone since I was about 12 to buy records. And so the owners knew me, and people knew me in the store. And I was in there, and I overheard the 2 owners talking, and they said, "Yeah, we're going to do this commercial on this new thing called MTV." And I was like, "Ooh, that's what is MTV?" So I heard commercial, and I don't know, I know where this came from. It's my dad and me. I went to these guys, "Hey, do you have a jingle for your commercial?" And they looked at me like, "What are you talking about, kid?" I'm like, "Do you have a jingle for this commercial you're going to do for MTV? We're talking business here, kid. Like, come on, go away." I'm like, "No, I'm serious. Do you have a jingle?" And I picked up a piece of paper and a pencil. I said, "What do you want it to say?" And they're like, just to get rid of me, they just said, "Well, we want the name of the store, the address, where we're located, what we sell." I'm like, Anything else?" And they're like, and so I leave, and I go home to my little studio in my bedroom, and I crank out 10 little 30-second songs. that range that I tried to do every style of music I could think of, from R&B to hip hop to rap to rock to, I think I did one that sounded like Frank Zappa. I did one that sounded like oh my God, one sounded like Prince, one sounded kind of like Pat Benatar. I just went everything I could think of. And I think I had about 10 or 12 of these little 30-second spots that were all about the balcony at 69th Street. And I show up about a couple days later with this cassette tape. Soon as they open, and I go, "Hey guys, I got your commercial." And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm a kid. I'm like this little kid. And I go in and they pop it in the cassette player and they're listening, and you see the smile come across their face, and they're like, "This is pretty good. Oh, wow." And I'm just sitting there like, like with a little grin on my face. And they look at me like, "What do you need to make this, to do this?" And I need to go into a real recording studio and record this. And they go, "What else?" And I just thought of the biggest number I could think of. $2,000. They're like, "Sure." And they're like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah." And so 2 days later, I'm in a recording studio and I record a thing, and they paid me in cash.
Wait,
And
you were 17 at the time?
yeah,
Yeah. The only thing I'll get on your case, unfortunately, you don't have that around anywhere, do you?
yeah.
Oh, do you really? Oh, that'd be so cool to
You
listen
want to
to
see
it.
it? I mean, if you want to stop, if you want to edit the recording, I can
I
pop
just
it.
might, because I'm so blown away by the story. The only thing I'm disappointed in, though, I'm looking in your background. I don't see the check, the first check framed. What a story!
I didn't even know that was a thing. They didn't give me a check. I thought they paid me in cash,
Well,
and
you
I was
probably,
so I
as
was
telling the story, you're probably kicking yourself. I would, that you asked for 2,000. You probably could have asked for 5,000.
well, here's what I found out later, is that at that point in time, to do what I did was probably worth about 15 grand.
Right,
Write a
exactly.
jingle for a 30-second spot that was going to be on TV. But the thing that was, I think the value I got out of it, even more than the monetary value, was someone gave me money for my creativity, something I made up in my bedroom. Just to have, I mean, literally, it was just me messing around and with some of my instruments and just making up something. And people said, "Oh, this has value." And I'm like, "Really? No one told me that I could make something that would have value just by making it up." I mean, I know it seems crazy, but it's a hard thing to grasp sometimes, that, when you're a kid and you're just sitting there going, this stuff I just do for fun, and I just make up stuff that they'll pay. There is somebody who will pay for it. The thing I wish I knew, because then I went, the thing went on to win a bunch of awards, and it aired on MTV forever, like 4 or 5 years. I wish I had a mentor back then who could have told me how to turn it into something sooner, because it took me another 10 years of life before I started my company. So I did that when I was I started Melody Vision when I was in my 30s, but I went on the track of trying to be a rock star, because I thought that's what you do when you're a musician. You try and play bands and you write songs, and you do those kind of things. So I didn't know that it's other. Well, here's the funny part of the story. So I knew there were advertising agencies, and so I went to a advertising agency and tried to see if they would hire me to do jingles for other people. But I showed up and I had a big giant mohawk and a hoop in my ear. I wore my leather pants with these really cool, what I thought were really cool Doc Martin boots, and I had a shirt that had studs all in it. I thought, well, I'm creative. I should show up as a rock star. And they were very, I didn't know advertising agencies were this conservative kind of, where people wear suits and ties. I'm thinking it's this joyous, creative place where there's people like making stuff, and they did not know what to make of me when I walked in there. I made this commercial, like, okay.
So you didn't get that gig.
I did not get that gig.
Okay. Well, fast forward. This is a great story, Rodney. I never knew this about you. So fast forward. So 17, then you did different stuff until your 30s.
Mhm.
You started your own company then. Where was it? How old were you when you started your company?
31 or 30. It's Melody Vision. Yeah, I think it was around. I went through my 20s playing in a lot of different bands. I had my own band. We were very, it's what does success mean? We had an Anheuser-Busch sponsorship. We were touring, like touring meaning we went out and played in
Okay.
the region. We got played on the local radio stations. We had a lot of record company interests. But a couple things happened for me personally. I was just not satisfied as an artist, as a creative person, doing one thing. I felt very stuck in, I had created this thing, it was this band, it was kind of a mix between R&B and rock, and I had great musicians in the band, and we had a really good following of people who liked this. And like I said, the record companies didn't sign us, but they loved us. I mean, we'd do these showcases and they'd all show up and give us all sorts of accolades and things like that. We had won a bunch of awards, but I just felt kind of stuck, because I wanted to explore orchestral music. I wanted to see what it was like to play jazz. I wanted to see, I wanted to score a film. I mean, there were all these other things I wanted to do that I felt like being in the band, I could just do that thing that the band did. And, we weren't successful enough that I could branch out and explore. And we're trying to get a record deal, all those kind of things. It just felt you know, kind of stifling in a way to me personally as a creative person. And so eventually I just got so frustrated. I ended the band and
Well, by the way,
kicked around.
what was the name of the band?
It was called Dark Blonde, which was
Okay.
uh yeah, there's a couple clips of us on YouTube if you look. But I ended the band and started Melody Vision, and right away got to do some things that were just completely out of the box and interesting. I started doing producing a radio show for the United Nations called the Student Global Voice. I started writing music for theater and dance, which was just unbelievably satisfying and challenging in a way that I had never thought that that kind of work could be. Like, working with choreographers and trying to write music for for an idea that they have that they're coming to me with. I tried writing music for film and failed miserably in the beginning. I didn't know what I was doing. I got all the technology together where I could sync up all the machines and everything, and I could watch the film and play to it, and but I didn't know what I was doing musically. And so I got some mentors as far as composing teachers, and started learning how to write and produce all different types of music. And
But
I
now let me ask you something. You're giving some good advice if anybody's listening to this, that you had all these ideas, but then you just said something, you got some mentors.
Mhm.
How do you go about getting them?
Well, I think one of the things I think about, well, I went back to school. This was fun. So my first thing was I went back to school to try and finish my composition degree. But what was funny was as soon as I got there, as an older student, plus someone who had already been working in studios and producing music for my band primarily, I knew how to use all the technology that was now new that none of the teachers knew how to use. So I'm sitting in the classroom and the teacher's trying to explain something, and I'm like, uh, that's not how that works. And the teacher would say, "Oh, well, come up and show me." And I'd show them. And I remember after 2 classes, one of the teachers took me to the dean and said, "Rodney should teach the finale class." Finale is this big software that allows you to write scores. And I'm sitting there going, "What? Oh, okay, sure." And next thing you know, I'm now teaching. And then not too long after that, I'm teaching at Lincoln University because they needed a tech teacher, and they were, willing to let me teach her because I had experience. And while I'm there, they're like, "Oh, could you teach music history 1 and 2?" I go, "I haven't taken music history 1 and 2 yet." They're like, "Well, we need someone to teach it, so you're teaching it." So I'm doing all this research and reading as I'm doing the curriculum, and teaching the class, and teaching music technology. At the same time, I'm going, but I'm not necessarily learning what I came here to learn. And so I started talking to my teachers, and they said, well, maybe you should get a mentor. And I said, will you mentor me? He said, I don't know if I'm the right person. So I started asking around, and I found a number of different composers who were doing different things. I mean, actually, that's not fair. My one teacher, he was the founder of Relash, and he was really into 20th century, 21st century contemporary classical music, which I had an interest in. And so I got him to mentor me on that stuff outside of what I had to do for my classwork. And I got him to help me with that. And then I met this amazing composer named John Hodian, who was doing TV, who was doing stuff for film at the time, but he's also kind of a world, and he writes operas and stuff like that. I got him to sort of help me along the way. The dean of the department, Dr. Clayton White, amazing teacher, and I got him to mentor me on the side around how to write choral music, and how to understand, how to read orchestral charts in a way that was easier than figured bass. I'm going way deep into the whole music thing, but there were just all these people, and if I met someone that I go, wow, you are cool, could you help me? I mean, the first person to do this, honestly, and that I even knew that mentoring was a thing, was a sort of a controversial person named Dr. Camille Paglia, who was teaching at University of the Arts my first year there. Now I'm going back in time, but when I was like in my early 20s, she had come from teaching at I think Harvard or Yale, and it was my first year at University of the Arts. And I remember walking to English class, and my mind was just completely blown, because here was this professor at a university who was teaching English, who was talking about the lyrics of the Doors, and how Jim Morrison was obsessed with Rimbaud, and she's talking about the Oedipus complex for the song The End, and I'm like, someone's taking rock seriously? Whoa. and taking the music that I kind of dig is taking it seriously, because one thing about musicians is when you're around serious musicians, most of them don't take rock or pop music seriously. They're like, that's not real music, And here was an English teacher, and we became friendly, and she mentored me for a while on how to write lyrics and how to be an artist. Just opened me up to like all the stuff that was mind-blowing, like from gave me a list of movies to watch, like Blue Angel with Marlene Dietrich's first film, and how to look at lyrics and how to construct them, and the history of the ballad form of songwriting. I mean, I'm just going through things quickly to be able to communicate them to you right now, but it was deep, and having that experience made me just, when I met someone who was cool and interesting, I would just ask them if they would show me stuff, like, show me what you do.
What's so cool about you, Rodney, is that you seem now to be doing the same thing yourself. And we're going to talk a little bit about now some of the stuff you're doing, but I'm kind of getting a sense of what you did and how you grew as a performer, artist, composer, whatever. But now you sort of seem to be doing that for other people now, or with other people. And let's talk a little bit about, I mean, there's so many different things you're involved in. Let's talk about three of them specifically you were mentioning to me. The one, I guess, is a completed project, and I think I spoke to you on the radio a couple of years ago about it. We just got the name. It's Angels. What's Angels?
Yeah, Angels and Saints, Eros and Awe.
What is that?
A documentary about the intersection of sexuality and religion, and it's the latest film that I've made with one of my filmmaking partners, Vic Comfer, and that's what we talked to you about last time we were on, and we recently sold that to two of the biggest education distributors. So if people are out there interested in taking a look at it, you could also go to the website, Angels and Saint Eros and Awe.com. I think it's .com. And there's a video on demand page where you can watch the film, but also there are education versions if people want to use it at university settings. You can get them either from ProQuest or InfoBased, and educators out there who are listening to this who teach know those two companies.
Now, by the way, is this also, do you have a website, your own
yeah, it's Angels and Saints Eros and Awe. I think it's .com.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's .com.
But
And
the information is there
as well.
Okay, so the information is there. if
Yeah.
they want to get
Yes.
information.
Yep.
So this is interesting. So all of a sudden, at whatever age you were at the time, you get involved in this filmmaking project.
So I've always wanted to make films, and I was very lucky that my friends that I grew up with, I didn't talk about this part, but I had a whole bunch of friends who were all into the arts. And while some kids would we were out playing football, I mean, we did that kind of stuff. We played football and soccer and stuff in my parents' backyard. But at 16, we were sneaking into comedy clubs because we wanted to see what comedians were doing. And we'd go to the art museum in Philly and look at modern art and try and understand it. And we'd go see art films. I mean, I saw Fellini's 8.5, I think, when I was 17 with my friends. That was like, hey, what do you want to do? Let's go see 8.5 by Fellini. It's gonna be so cool. And we'd go and we're sitting there and like, do you know what this means? I don't have any idea. I don't know what's going on either. But
Join the crowd.
but we didn't go read about it and go try and figure it out. And so when it came time to go to college, all that whole chunk of those friends went to Temple University for radio, television, and film, and I went to UArts for music. And a couple of them went to school for acting. And as we were there, that group expanded, and there were more of us, and we'd all hang out at my apartment. And it was sort of like our little version of Paris at the turn of the century, or the Algonquin Round Table. It's just this group of creatives who all hung out together, and we'd share what we were working on or attempting to work on. We'd talk about concepts and ideas we were thinking about. And so a good chunk of them went off to move to LA and became filmmakers. And we stayed friends. And I would always ask them, how do you doing this? How does this work? Because I also had visions of making movies. I mean, it's been and so like I think all along scoring film and writing music for TV was my way in. And then once I was in, I could kind of see how it all worked and maybe pick up a camera myself and try it. And eventually I did, and I started shooting, and it was a learning curve. I was not very good in the beginning, but that's the case with everything when you first started. You're never good when you first start something, but I wanted to do it. And pretty quickly though, I mean, I think just because of all of the work I had done, just being creative, and again, going back to my dad being creative and working on things, um, once I got cameras and started shooting stuff, I started getting work. And very soon I became independent producer for HBO Family, and I was producing some segments for a show called 30 by 30 Kid Flicks. And I was working with the local PBS affiliate, and I was starting to edit things through my company. I started editing some movies, and I didn't care what it was in the very beginning. I mean, I think the first thing I edited that was sold is this really, well, I won't disparage, it's very low budget horror comedy called Creepin'. And I was like, well, it's a film and it's out there, and I did it. And that just said, okay, let's keep going. And so that's kind of how it was. And again, I found some mentors, but luckily those mentors too were also friends that I had for lifelong friends. And I would ask them questions about, how do I do this and how do I do that, and what's this mean? And I knew I wanted to make documentaries because I don't know, I like the idea of going into someone else's world for a moment in time and learning everything I can about how they see the world, and then coming back and being able to share that through my own filter, I guess, or sensibility.
One of the things that really impressed me about you, Rodney, is also you like seem to ask lots of questions, and I guess that's how you learn, or much of what you learn by just. I mean, I'm so impressed. You're talking about all your friends and all these other people and their mentors,
Yeah.
and you just kind of pick them up and learn from them as you go along.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so go from there, then fast forward to then another project you're involved in. It's a really cool project, Healthy News Network.
Yeah.
And what's that all
So
about?
Healthy Newsworks is a nonprofit that has been around for I think about 20 years, and they do just an amazing job of teaching journalism to elementary and middle school age kids, through the lens of health. And my good friend Deborah Stern turned me on to Healthy Newsworks, and I met Marion Allman and all the people there who are are so passionate about working with kids and getting them excited about being able to do exactly what I was just saying, to go into someone else's world, explore it, and then report on it, because that's what journalism is in the truest sense is about. You go into something that you don't know about and you ask questions. And one of the amazing things about Healthy Newsworks that I love so much is that they don't dumb it down for kids. And it's when the kids are doing a news story, it's a real news story. They're interviewing Jordan Mailata, who is a member of the Eagles. They're interviewing the leading person who is been researching coronavirus. They're interviewing the latest project that we're working on is all about the environment and eco anxiety and the health of the planet. And they're interviewing people who are the top in that field and report, and then they make they write stories about it. So it's not just like it's a kids project where the kids are learning. It's a kids project, and the ultimate result is something that you can watch and actually learn something from. It's real. So the film we did last year is called How We Heal, and it just takes a look at how how could kids heal coming out of the pandemic, but more importantly, looking at just how do you know when you're just blue, kind of sad, or really in need of some help, and what's the difference, and what does that look like? And it's a serious question that I think a lot of parents are concerned about their kids, and kids frankly were concerned about as we started working with them. So we made this documentary. It's not really a documentary, it's a mock news show where the kids are acting as reporters, and it looks like a news set and all this sort of stuff. This was kind of the idea I had for how to present this. And then they did real interviews with real people about mental health.
By the way, before I ask you to show a clip of that, how do you find these kids, or how do they get involved in this?
So Healthy Newsworks has a relationship with schools in the Philadelphia area, and they go to the school, and if the school wants the program, they get it. And originally they were doing newspapers, and they do a book, and they do a magazine now, um, and um, and it's part of their class time, and there's some after school class time that the kids are involved with, and that's how they get involved. So if there's people out there who are listening to this, and look up healthynewsworks.org, I believe is the website, and it's all one word, Healthy Newsworks. Um, they can find a way that maybe they can get involved and help out the nonprofit, and also be able to view some of these films that I'm talking about, and also maybe have the program come to their school.
Let me ask you if I can, because I think people will really get an idea for it. You showed me before we got on the air here a brief clip from that. Could you pull that up?
Yeah, I would appreciate. So this is a little clip from the show How We Heal, and this actually won the San Diego Children's Film Festival last year, and we're all very, very proud of that. It's a little clip of How We Heal.
Challenges. In this news production, they will report on the answers they found. Healthy Newsworks is proud to present How We Heal. Hi, my name is Caitlin.
And my name is Jackson.
Welcome to Healthy Newsworks, How We Heal.
Our first segment will explore the meaning of healing and how kids can help themselves heal. We'll hear from Dr. Sandra Bloom, an associate professor at the Dornsife School of Public Health at Drexel University.
Dr. Pierre Chenoine, a pediatrician who practices in Abington, Pennsylvania.
Jermel Johnson, a principal dancer at the Philadelphia Ballet.
And lastly, Jordan Mailata, who plays for the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll now go to John, one of our reporters in the field.
According to Dr. Bloom, healing means becoming whole again. He explained to us that emotional wounds can sometimes be harder to recover from than physical ones.
It's one thing if we're healing our bodies are healing because our bodies do it pretty automatically, right? You have to get a cut and like your body just takes over and starts to heal the cut. But it's a different thing when it's a hurt in another way to
Rodney,
our.
let me jump
to our
in here,
emotional
Rodney.
self.
If you just come back to me and
It's emotional
Yeah.
pain.
pause
I
that.
just want to show you this a little bit.
Oh, okay, great.
Have to do things. We have to respond in some way, and we don't always know what to do. And you will have noticed when your feelings have been hurt or when your body's been hurt that it's really hard to pay attention to anything else.
So the reason I just wanted to share that a little bit more, that because the kids also do all the drawings, and one of the things I try, the Healthy Newsworks tries to communicate to the kids, but I also do, is that being an artist in some way is also being a reporter. You can use art to communicate an idea, and sometimes news can be, or journalism is very literal, but art can actually communicate something that is ephemeral. Like you can get a sense of something and you can share it with someone that's very hard to put into words. And so and not all kids have the same ability or interest or talent. So opening it up so that some kids could draw the story, and some kids could make up a little music for the story, and some kids could be the reporter or write a poem. I mean, just opening it up so that they learn this thing from the person they interviewed, but they can express it in so many different ways. And I love that Healthy Newsworks gives the young people the opportunity to be able to do that, to be able to share then the what they've learned in their own way, the way that the medium that speaks to them, if you will.
And just watching this, I'm saying to myself, it's almost too bad that they didn't have this when you were a kid, because can you imagine, forget your music career, for everything else, you would be a national, newscaster or something. Can you imagine?
It's funny. I just got a job working with this new school that I'm working with here in Philadelphia, our Global Leadership Academy. And I am getting to work in my work with them. I'm going to create a program similar to what you're talking about, where I can help to basically, I say, do what my dad did, expose young kids to the world and the opportunity to find their own voice, express themselves. So yeah, I think I had a lot of help, but I had a lot of support when I was a kid. So many great teachers I had when I was a little kid. And it's funny, I had not really thought about it until you asked me about the mentor thing. But in the late 70s, when CB was all the craze, I would meet all sorts of people on the CB radio, and I'd ride my bike and have an eyeball with them. That's what we called it back then. And some of those people did sort of become little mentors. I mean, I don't know if young people could be safe to do the kind of things that we could do back then when we were younger. But I remember I met a guy who, just talking to him on the CB radio, I met this guy who designed speakers for large events. So every once in a while, I'd ride over to his house and go see his wife. I go, "Hey, is Steve home?" And his wife would go, "Rodney, he's not home from work yet." Well, okay. And I get back on my bike and ride away. But when he was home, he'd take me down into his workshop and he'd show me these speakers he was building for one of the big speaker companies that put sound systems all over the country in stadiums. And he would just show me how he was doing it, like how he'd wind the coil and what he was thinking about. And so I've always been looked out for mentors. And I wish in some ways the world was a little bit more of a safer place, because you have so much time when you're young to explore things. And there's so many people out there that know stuff that would love to share it.
Hey, Rodney, before I let you go, I'd like you to share one other thing you were showing me off the air. There was another clip we were talking about that I'd like you to show as well.
Yeah, I just finished the documentary that's going to be airing on PBS starting October 12th. and it's airing all over the country. It's a documentary called Codename Ayalon, and it's a documentary about an underground kibbutz in Israel that was a secret bullet factory during the occupation of the British. And here is a little clip from that film. Let's see here. Or here's a little bit of the trailer, I should say, from that film. It's a little 30-second teaser here.
1948, a group of young people answered the call to take part in a dangerous clandestine mission that changed the course of history and secured the birth of a new nation.
These were people who were fighting for a bit of land. And I think it has a message. You can be knocked down, but you can stand up.
Find out how an underground bullet factory led to the salvation of Israel in the documentary Codename Ayalon.
There you go.
Hey, Ronnie, how'd you get involved in that?
So a good friend of mine was the director, who's since retired from filmmaking, a gentleman named Michael Lopayton, and I had worked on a number of projects with him as a composer. And the producer of this is a woman named Laurel Fairworth, who is a former news reporter, and she we became friends as we were working on the thing, and so that's how I got involved. And actually she's the producer of a new film I'm working on, which I can't really talk about yet, but a new film that's about an interesting relationship between two groups of people, and she's the producer on that new film. That won't be out till next year, but Laurel Fairworth is the creative force behind Codename Ayalon. And Michael had retired, and when we sold the film, I came in and just kind of finished it up so we could give it the channel, give it to PBS, and it's going to air next month.
And if I can, let me ask you two final questions. I don't want to hold you up all night here, but I mean, this is amazing what we're talking about. Out of all the things you've done, and I'd say there are about 27 different things you've done, maybe 43, do you have a favorite thing that you do?
Well, people ask me that all the time. What's your favorite thing? I've grown to think of myself as I'm a storyteller with lots of skills. Because at the end of the day, whether I'm playing my guitar sitting by myself in a cafe, or I'm on stage with a rock band, or I'm producing an album, or I'm making a movie, or I'm working on a podcast, or whatever it is, I'm telling a story. And I love telling stories, as you can see, because you can't get me to stop talking. But and I strongly feel that some stories are better told in certain mediums. So if there's a thought I have, or an idea, or a concept that someone wants to help making, I've had people who've come to me and said, I really want to make this movie about this thing, and I go, that's a podcast. And I go, what do you mean? I go, here's why I think it's better to use this medium to tell the story. And once I show them, they're like, you're right, that should be a podcast. And then someone will say, oh, I got this idea for a song. I go, that should be a movie. And then we can make the song, but that should be a movie. And sometimes I'll help them then figure out how to make that movie. But I love telling stories, and I love how that inspires other people to I don't know. I was gonna be grandiose and say helps them find themselves, but I just think that that's what humans do. We tell stories that helps us understand something about the human condition. It helps us feel connected. It helps us to be with each other, and it's how we learn about each other. I mean, I think there's a reason why all the religious texts are not written as technical manuals, although I've had some challenging discussions with people that some people think they are. They're parables, they're stories. And that's I love being able to be part of that tradition of telling stories.
And if I can ask you one final question, down the road, is there anything you see yourself doing that you haven't done, perhaps? If you have it's going to be the first movie, it's going to be the first rock opera.
One of the things I would love to get into doing, and maybe there's some people out there who would love to have me do this, is doing some public speaking. I'd love to go around and, you know, I've done lectures at universities, but I haven't done, sort of motivational public speaking and just talking about how creativity and living a creative life can be pretty awesome.
And I think, by the way, that's
how to be an artist and all those kind of things like that. So all the stuff we've been talking about tonight, that's one thing.
What you just said, by the way, I think is almost the theme to it. I love the title, Living the Creative Life, or Living the Creative Life is Awesome, or Awesomeness, or something like that.
Yeah.
But that'd be great. And I cut you off. You want to say something else?
Yeah, I mean, and I always think just more of what I've been doing. I mean, I know, expanding it and meeting just more interesting, unique, colorful people, or just ordinary, just meeting more people and finding out how they see the world. That is the thing that just fascinates me. It's funny. Someone asked me, if you had $1 million, what would you do? What would you do anything different? I go, no, I'd probably do exactly what I do. It just could be more selective about what I would pick to do. But that would be I don't think there would be anything I would really want to change. And so I think the thing I'm looking for is just the next challenge. I don't even know what that would be, but it'll come in the door, or it'll be a phone call, or I'll trip over.
Rodney, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best bet? Or find out more.
Me at Melody Vision, which is the name of my company, www.melodyvision.com. They could send me an email. I'm Rodney@melodyvision.com. They could call the studio 610-941-9300 extension 1. And just reach out and say hi.
And again, I want to thank you, Rodney Whittenberg, for being my guest on this Blaine's World podcast. I also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. And if you can stay with me as we wrap up, I'll say goodbye to you here, and you and I'll finish up off the air. So thanks, man. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.